forward. So with that said, let me just start with some of the numbers. And again, I'm not going to interpret them because I'm not in a position to do so. I am going to let you interpret them for me. First of all, what's the current business condition in your country? As you can see, the attitudes in Saudi Arabia are much better. I touched this with the picture. I won't do it again. The attitudes in Saudi Arabia are much better. 3 times, actually, more confident or optimistic about current conditions than they are in the Emirates. What's also interesting, I think, is that when we looked at large businesses versus small businesses, larger businesses reflect almost 40% of them, 43% said that business was flourishing in their country. Smaller businesses, about 41% said businesses were declining, which says to me that the smaller businesses are being more affected by the downturn than the larger ones are. When you go to the next one, we say, what do you think conditions will be like in the next 2 years? And here you have an optimism in both a big turnaround in UAE, from where it was 15% up to 45%. In Saudi Arabia, the shift is from 46% up to 66%, a bigger jump in UAE. Both societies feeling a little more optimistic, in other words, about the future. And again, larger businesses, 14%, or 14 points rather, higher in optimism about the future than the smaller businesses. Now, what is the greatest opportunity for GCC's increased competitiveness lie? Interesting, because UAE numbers are with the line and the overall numbers are with the blue bar. You'll see that in each of the 5 areas there, with particular emphasis on the 2 that were more than half of the total respondents picked, diversification and consolidation of regional companies into global leaders. The numbers largely track between the UAE and the overall. They're a little higher in Saudi Arabia in some of them, but overall the numbers largely track between the two, between these 2 major economic powers in the Gulf region. When we asked, is consolidation a major theme in your industry post-crisis, overall answer was no. And interestingly enough, Saudi Arabia, much greater no than UAE. In Saudi Arabia, the no to consolidation was 48%. In UAE, it was only 34%. Among those who said yes, in Saudi Arabia, it was only 16%, with 32% in UAE. So consolidation is a bigger theme here than it is with your neighbor to the west. Of those who said yes, that consolidation was a theme, we asked which of the following has been the biggest benefit for companies in growing via consolidation, and the 2 major issues were their cost savings and acquisition of skills. Now come 2 of the ones that I think are interesting, each in their own way. How satisfied are you with your government's response to the crisis? UAE, split. Saudi Arabia, very satisfied. 66% say that they're satisfied, only 27% dissatisfied. A huge gap there. And if you look at, has business confidence in the government been impacted by the crisis? Add the first 2 bars, only 19% in UAE thought that their confidence in government had either improved or there was no impact from the crisis. 71% said that there was a negative impact, either slightly damaged or government was undermined. In Saudi Arabia, on the other hand, it's 41% thought that attitudes had improved or confidence in government had improved or there was no impact, whereas 45% said it was undermined. Now look at that number of the dissatisfaction in the UAE, and look at the next one. Which of the following GCC countries sets the standard for making government more business-friendly, legal reform or an education reform? UAE wins hands down in every one of the categories. Kind of interesting, I think, that dissatisfaction, but still the standard. And if you take out what we call self-voters, that is to say, people who from UAE voting for UAE or people from Saudi voting for Saudi, look at the UAE number still high, meaning that in Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabians largely feel that satisfied with their own government's performance and more confident in their own government, but nevertheless feeling that UAE sets the standard for being business friendly. I would think that in the future it is worth probing that deeper to find out what business friendly actually means and how to interpret the meaning of those numbers. But those certainly are in legal reform, which is more specific, and education reform, more specific. Still, UAE far and away the higher of the six GCC countries polled. Going on to the next, which issues require immediate attention, and which, if not addressed, pose the greatest long-term threat. Overall, it's education reform and labor reform. That's what it is overall. And I think it's worth noting that improving transparency is up there too. But look at just take note of the difference between long-term threat, if not addressed, and the most immediate concern. Now let's look at just UAE alone on that issue. And you can see that while transparency is third overall, in UAE it is far and away number one as an immediate issue to be addressed. Now, in contrast, which again is UAE, the most immediate problems are improving transparency and labor reform. And then after that is the company ownership laws. But let me just show you the Saudi Arabia numbers. I don't have a chart on it. I'll just give you the numbers. We'll go across the board over here. Immediate concern, improving transparency in Saudi Arabia. Only 12% say that's a problem. Labor reform in Saudi Arabia, 34%. Company ownership laws, obviously an issue here in the Emirates. Saudi Arabia, 0. Simply not a problem. No one mentioned. Education reform, Education reform in Saudi, overall, the number was, for education reform, 29%. In UAE, it's only 11%. The reason why is because in Saudi Arabia, 42%, almost half the respondents said it was the most immediate problem that had to be addressed in the country. Reducing bureaucracy, again, a 0 in Saudi Arabia. And environmental protection, about the same, 3%. I mean, neither country saw those as immediate or even significant long-term problems.